Hello all. I'll make a start. We've had about 50 odd people booked on for today, and I can see we're a bit low in numbers at the moment, so we're on 29, and that includes a number of my colleagues here from VS&W. So we've got Kirit Patel, Anna Cooper, Alana Tucker, Martin Hall, and Andrew Rainsforth from VS&W. So we should be close to about 60 if everybody who's booked on is coming today, but we'll make a start and hopefully others will turn up as we go along. So thank you for those who have made it. If you want to introduce yourself, would you do that in the chat, please, and just let people know who you are and where you're from if it doesn't make it clear in your name. If you could be on mute when you're not in the breakout rooms, that would be really helpful. We're going to record most of the day, so hopefully you've got that reminder at the beginning. So please turn off the camera or change your name if you don't wish to be included that way. So completely contradicting my own advice about introducing yourselves. We're going to see whether we need to circulate this round to other networks and people as part of this piece of work. So hopefully it'll just be slides rather than lots of faces. And when we're just recording some of the workshop breakouts for our own note-taking purposes. So you can feel free to call everybody all sorts of names, usual social polite ways that you would choose to use, if that's okay. In terms of the context setting, I should have just emailed to you, hot off the press, our 9 headline areas from the manifesto or vision or whatever we're going to call it. So we've been developing these areas, I think, since last November. So everything was on the brink of, we'll be soon out of this soon, so let's get on with the next phase of recovery, which really hasn't been part of the Northwest story, has it, since November, October time. So we've been holding these conversations for longer than we'd planned to, on the basis that it's a bit difficult to engage in some of this stuff at the moment, and there are other priorities, and we recognise that. But as part of this, there was a small working group of VCFSE leaders working together to develop this draft. So this is draft, this isn't written in stone. If you don't like it, let us know. If there's something that needs to be included that's not there, let us know. So what we'll try and do at the end of this session today with your kind advice and input is to develop the vision or manifesto for Lancashire's VCFSE sector into something that we can then very formally consult on using SurveyMonkey and all those things that everybody else dreads over the next couple of weeks to sign that off and see where people see it fitting into their lives and their work and what's useful and what's not. So it's not the last chance, but this is the kind of firming up of the final draft based on all the input we've had over the last, it's going on for 6 months now. So I don't know if you've all seen the local Lancashire website that was developed with the 10 headline areas. We've merged a couple and developed a new one, and we'll be going through some of those in the workshops. And as you'll only get to, if you stay the full time today, contribute to 2 of those areas, you might be interested in some of the other areas as part of that SurveyMonkey consultation. And we're always here if you just want to ring us up and go, why is this and why is it not that? I'm very happy to do it that way if SurveyMonkey is not the right tool for you. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you've got the document that's been shared. And I'm going to try and run through this just to give you a heads up before we move into the breakout rooms. So just bear with me. Hopefully this will work. So can you all see this document if I get rid of some of this? Oops, sorry. Yes. Is that viewable for you?
Yeah.
Right, fab. So what we're going to do in some of the breakouts is go through each of these areas one at a time. This one here, it was originally equality and social justice for all and developing a anti-poverty strategy in Lancashire. And I've just merged the two because it didn't quite make sense to keep them separate. But the headline asks around this are a welcome programme for asylum seekers across Lancashire, a Lancashire Commission to address poverty, we see that's cross-sector, equalities panels or partnerships to think through more protected characteristics. So it's building on the work that Lancashire BME Network's been doing around the Independent Race Equality Panel and thinking through that model, which we think is a fantastic way of doing things, and how we get the voice of different communities represented across Lancashire in the conversations and the future of whatever Lancashire might look like. Developing a poverty and equalities framework that we would hopefully, basically some metrics, how is Lancashire doing, what's not working, what is working, and have that report on a specific day each year. We've seen Pankhurst have done something around equality of women and girls, and they report on a specific date, and I think it just gives it a bit of momentum each year around that. So we thought that might be a useful way to do this. The fifth area there is around community-based answers to the 3 challenges that have come up over the last year, which is digital exclusion, fuel poverty, and food poverty. And I think those 3 things will continue to be a big part of the nature of life going forward. So that's that one. The second one is around thinking of us as an equal partner. So how do we do that co-design of economic investment? So where's our ask as part of the Shared Prosperity Fund or the Community Renewal Fund? What does post-Brexit funding look like that supports communities? Implement the accords. That's the accord that the VCFSE Alliance has developed as part of the sign-off of the health and social care work. And I think through how this manifesto might connect to that is the line we've got in there. A new model of corporate social responsibility. So how do we work with local enterprise partnership businesses, the Chamber of Commerce and private sector across Lancashire? Be proud of Lancashire's voluntary sector, and how do we promote that? Develop a mechanism to collectively engage with Lancashire's MPs. So we've seen that there are all-party parliamentary groups in other parts of the country, and if not that, then how do we create that collective voice and influence that connects in nationally through Lancashire sector? Third area, I'm rattling through this, but you will have a chance to talk through these if you're in the right workshop, and obviously later on with the Survey Monkey. Third area is economic model that works for Lancashire. Anna sent me a message saying you can see all my formatting. This is how pedantic I am. It's got to be 1 space and 1 space only. So, but that's just me personally. Right, economic model that works for Lancashire. So access to, I've mentioned that one, affordable access to buildings and facilities. So this came through, these have all come through the conversations and workshops that we've been running. So support, how do we make sure that people can access those community centres and community buildings and facilities? There's a massive opportunity around the Preston model and some of the inclusive economic development there. So how do we build on that? How do we create access to local credit unions in those areas where they're most needed? How do we develop accessible and advice on debts and housing benefits and other forms of support? And real living wage. So how as a sector do we sign up to that? Are there barriers? We need to talk to commissioners around that so that we've at least got that real living wage for our own staff and employed colleagues. The fourth area is around community wellbeing and person and community centred approaches. I think what person and community centred approaches was in the original draft that we put out wasn't clear, but we've tried to go through some of the feedback we've had there. So I think establish a services for the public innovation panel. So work with the innovation agency to see if they would provide a secretariat function for thinking through actually how do we do things in a new way, given the likely impact on public sector partners' investment over the coming years. There was a document a long time ago. Now this hasn't come through from the consultation event. So if you want to chuck this out, that's fine. But 5 years ago, there was the Realising the Value piece of work that the NHS commissioned and was pulled together by the Health Foundation. So it was an extremely well-resourced piece of research that pinpointed to the voluntary sector being at the heart of any effective health and wellbeing strategy. So I thought we might want to review that as part of a joint piece of work with public sector partners, if that's something that would be of use. But if people don't like this, let us know in that session, we'll take it out. There were 2 contradictory pieces of input. One was around community boards. So how do we have representation and partnership at a local level, whether that's a health neighbourhood or a ward, which would be, I'm not against that, but it's thinking through the voices of communities. And then the next one was around how we might have a network of community champions. So it might be that the two are compatible, but it might be that you decide that the two are duplicating each other. So I've put in a little bit around whether those community champions at ward level are doing the voice role or whether they're more kind of community organisers. I think there was something around a person-centred delivery principle. So the recognition that we can't just work our magic overnight, that it needs longer term conversations about that kind of public service delivery model and how we support people in a way that supports them going forward, rather than it being an overnight, here's our output done. And we need that recognised by commissioners and public sector partners. Develop something around a VCFSE mental wellbeing model of support. This didn't come through the conversations we've had so far, but it was mentioned obliquely in one of the workshops, but it felt like such a major area we probably needed to pick up on it. But if people think that's not something we want, then please take it out. And then I've just put in principles around community-led community development models, which I don't think you would disagree with. I think there's an opportunity around a model of support for Lancashire's wider workforce. So how do we think through the investment that goes into public sector workforce and supporting paid staff, volunteers and carers in a bit more of a systematic way? So this is where this is about services for the public rather than public services, if you can get your head around that nuance, which took me about 3 years of somebody saying it to me repeatedly. So hopefully you've managed that in those 10 seconds. Green communities. So how do we reimagine public spaces to create community ownership and pride? How do we develop that kind of community food supply chains that links to food banks, links to community gardens and allotments? And how do we build that movement across Lancashire? And is that something we want to do? How do we create a green Lancashire network? So how do we get the networking going on across all the localities of Lancashire and support people to think through how we create that green agenda? There's not a lot in here around what we need to do or what support we might have in terms of premises or buildings, and that might be something that needs to be picked up as part of that workshop session. Sixth area is around a Lancashire social prescribing model. So how do we promote it and how do we build the right kind of system? I've put in some principles, I won't go through these here. I've put in 9 principles that I've been in conversation with people working in social prescribing across Lancashire. And we've started to have that conversation outside of Lancashire around these 9 principles. But if that was picked up as part of that workshop, I think some of the national rhetoric around all the investments going into the holiday agents and not the holiday destinations is something we need. It's very much what these 9 principles are about, but let's see what people think. Number 7 is a Safer Lancashire. So we've got a new Police and Crime Commissioner in Andrew Snowden, 3rd term, and the Police and Crime Commissioners have been going since 2012 was when the first election was. So we've got the accord, should there be one with the sector and the PCC? Should there be a review of PCC and sector practice? So we've seen some good models across the country. Where are we up to in Lancashire? There's an ask around the review of youth provision. It needn't be part of this relationship with the PCC, but it seems timely there. So some of it was about after school clubs and youth provision and youth services in general. And I think that's a major part. So it might be oddly placed here, but it gives us a hook in with the Police and Crime Commissioner, I think. And then reviewing online safety guidance, because we've all been online very much so, and as have the people we work for. Helping people into employment. I've just got 4 headline areas around employability of young people, picking up on the Kickstart scheme, which is that kind of apprenticeship scheme, and how much it's being used by the voluntary sector. With partners, build that evidence base around volunteering and use volunteering as an approach into an employment. So this section here might link into the conversations that more broadly we want to have with, say, the local enterprise partnership around what that shared prosperity fund coming soon has been promised for many years now, but genuinely should be starting once the Community Renewal Fund pilots are underway a little bit. So we're expecting guidance sometime over the summer around what the shared prosperity fund looks like. So is this a useful ask as part of that around our role in supporting employment? The last area, sorry, I've whittled on. I'm not too bad on time, I think. It's around and you might say most importantly, or you might not. So it's adequate resources for our sector to play the full part in the future of Lancashire. So co-designing funding in Lancashire. Some time ago, we started a conversation or restarted a conversation around bringing together different funders. In particular, I was thinking through the lottery and the Lancashire Community Foundation to think through, and they fed into the conversations around the emergency trust funding that was shared across Lancashire and the lottery funding there. But it could be that we want to have a more formal funding forum, and I know Denise Partington at Community Futures is supporting that, but have them meet with representatives from the sector to do a bit more co-design around that investment and the need on the ground. The second one is about developing and consulting on a VCFSE commissioning framework. This wasn't specifically asked for by through the workshops, but there's been threads of this, and there's probably some duplication in the long list I've got on this last area. And it might be that it really needs to fit under this kind of commissioning framework that we ask of public sector partners. So one of the things I'd be looking for in a very short-term way, and I know I've steered very much away from the health and social care agenda, but is if CCGs are disappearing as of 31st of March, what about the contracts that they've got with the VCSE sector? So a couple of places in the Northwest have been asking for 2-year and 18-month contracts from their CCGs to see them through that point in time, so that they're not just coming to ask for a public sector commissioner where their investment is and they're not there because they've lost the job and they're nowhere to be seen for some weeks. So it might be thinking through some of that short-term stuff and then that longer-term conversation around how we work together. Third one there is about that ask I've mentioned already around the Shared Prosperity Fund, but I think that's something very important we need to make the most of. Recovery investment into community centres and sector service providers. So going back from at some point soon, and some of you will be already doing face-to-face delivery, how do we do that kind of recovery model where we're being asked to do, I imagine, blended and online and face-to-face at the same time? So what kind of investment might there be around that? Very practical stuff around zero rated VAT for capital works on charity was one of this is the direct proposals just lifted from people's suggestions. And then full rates relief, I should say there, for sector premises and service providers over the coming year as part of the recovery. And then the last four are recognition of the sector's role in planning, and linking it to light touch grant investment, sector access to free community assets and other free resources. So we might not get cash, but are there other in-kind resources that might help us out? A programme of sector leadership and future leaders training. So that's kind of linking back into the workforce piece I mentioned earlier. And then access to uncomplicated small pot grant funding. And I think particularly for small, medium, and below the radar community groups. So I would expect to see something like that as part of an effective VCFSE commissioning framework, but it doesn't harm to spell it out here. That's something I think we as a sector would be interested in. I've got my section of dual collections. So what are we called? What patch do we cover? Do we cover South Cumbria as well as Lancashire 14? How does this connect to the Accord Agreement? Do we call this a manifesto, a vision, or set of ambitions, or other suggestions? How do we connect and represent the sector? So how does the voice come through? How do we channel routes into the different networks and systems of the voluntary sector across Lancashire? And the most important question, which is the one we'll be asking as part of the Survey Monkey, and following on from that, is how do we do this? Who does this? What part might you play as part of this if you were interested and your organisation's willing to endorse that? So how do we go forward? So I'll unshare here.